Good evening. I'm Stacey Russell and welcome to the People's Business. On April 2nd, 2025, United States President Donald Trump announced his administration would be implementing a 10% baseline tax on all countries exporting goods to the U.S. and even higher reciprocal tariffs for other countries like China. Barbados and its CARICOM neighbors, except Guyana, are facing the 10% tax. On the day the taxes were supposed to take effect April 9th, Mr. Trump put them on hold for 90 days. Still, uneasiness abounds regarding imports into Barbados and CARICOM. Tonight, we are discussing the likely impact of U.S. imposed export tariffs and shipping levies on imports into Barbados, a small island developing state subject to the whims of globalization. Here to share their expert knowledge and field your questions are Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Ryan Straughn, Chief Executive Officer of Export Barbados, Mr. Mark Hill, as well as past President of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry, who is a Bridgetown businessman, Lalu Vaswani. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for joining us for the People's Business. Just before we get into the full analysis, let's take a commercial break and come right back with the People's Business. Welcome back to the People's Business. Tonight we are discussing U.S. tariffs and their likely impact in Barbados. And I'm going to start with Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Ryan Straughn. What opportunities, if any, do you see for Barbados in these times?
Good evening, Ms. Russell. Good evening, Lalu and Mark. Good evening to your viewers. We are faced with an extraordinary set of circumstances, not just in the region, but globally. And the government has set about a very clear strategy since 2018 in terms of broadening our path with respect to economic diversification. And therefore, we have invested quite a bit of resources into supporting businesses to be able to get their products to market, but equally to get into other areas of the globe. And I think this is really an opportune time now for us to be able to accelerate and deepen those relations. We have started to execute a fairly aggressive Latin American strategy, which most Barbadians are aware of the flights with Copa, and more Barbadians are actually doing more trade with Latin America. We've also been exploring opportunities in Africa, opportunities in the Middle East, and later this year we will be opening a mission in India specifically to make sure that we can liaise with and create linkages with respect to doing more business in Africa, in the Middle East, as well as in India. And therefore, the government, working with the private sector, will continue to open up those doors with respect to investment, not just of goods for the movement of goods, but with respect to the provision of services. And therefore, we believe that, notwithstanding the fact that the United States has embarked on a worldwide trade war, whilst there is concern for us in the region, given that the last time that we've seen something of this nature with respect to taxation of this level, at least for Barbadians, was the National Social Responsibility Levy back in 2016. Of course, that was at a very small scale given Barbados's proportion of world trade, but this now is a significant intervention, and therefore, with respect to the long-term trajectory of the United States and how that impacts us in the region, this is part of the reason why we need to push more aggressively in terms of pursuing those opportunities that we know exist, and therefore the government is committed to working with the private sector to be able to bring those opportunities to fruition in order to mitigate any of the downside risks that will present itself in the short term.
Okay, before I get to the private sector representative, I want to go to Mr. Mark Hill, simply because you are the man at the head of Export Barbados. On a daily basis, you're helping Barbadians to get their products into overseas markets. Can Barbados win in this trade war?
Yeah, but there's a lot of innovation and creativity that we can apply to this in this particular context. So, for example, the supply chain. As you would know, Barbados imports quite a bit of its inputs for industry. But here's an opportunity, I think, because of the actual tariffs itself, that make us begin to say, well, look, we've got to think different about how we source our inputs. So we can look at other markets, as Minister pointed out, India as an opportunity, China, which we anticipate will have a certain level of oversupply of certain materials. So you can get better prices that can pass on to customers and pass into the business system going forward as well. So that's on one side. But the other area that we see is that we can build new value chains as well. And so that upstream, midstream, and downstream, that there's areas where we can create new levels of value across the board. So while it is challenging, there is a lot of room for Barbadian companies to innovate and to improve and to build levels of efficiency, effectiveness across the board.
Okay. I'm taking your perspective, but I had a sit down with Professor Winston Moore. He is a professor in economics at the University of the West Indies at Cave Hill just Friday, and he had some perspectives in relation to supply chains. And I have a clip to play here now, and then we will get Mr. Vaswani's comments or anyone else's comments on it.
You can see a significant impact on supply chains, because you can have a supplier saying, if I'm faced with over 100% tariff, it does not make, which is essentially a doubling in price. It doesn't make any sense me trying to export this good to Barbados, because most of the people, most of the manufacturers in Barbados, most of the consumers in Barbados are not going to be able to afford the good. So they might simply say, we're going to look for other markets that don't rely on transshipment through the United States. And it could impact on the availability of some goods and the availability of some inputs into consumption, and availability of some inputs into the production processes.
Mr. Vaswani, you're not just representing the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry here tonight as a past president, but you are a businessman. You sell goods out of your establishment on Swan Street. What is your response to Professor Moore's comments, your insights?
Well, we have to always be mindful of what comes down, but when we have our innate confidence on how we are going to divert and adapt, we rely on that. In Barbados, we have always found ways to consensually find solutions, and government working with private sector is one specific example. And we have found ways to lower costs. For example, there was a time, or there is a time, has been, where it takes you many days to clear a container, maybe 5, 7, 10 days. And as a consequence of that, there are added costs that the importer has no option but to pay, and the country has no option but to release the foreign exchange, maybe over 20 million a year. But by working in partnership with the government, we're working towards clearing our shipments within 24 hours. And so that savings that you have, and just an example, will inherently pass down through your costs, lower costs, and hopefully lower pricing to your consumer. So my point is by using synergistic efforts to find diversification of markets, diversification of supply chains, seeing where the value points is, and as Mr. Hill said, using innovation. Because if you have something with innovation, then it's not a question of I can get this, you cannot get the same thing at the same price. This is what the value quotient is we're offering. So these are complementary strategies that we need to do. But the overarching approach has to be a consensual approach, which is the DNA of Barbados. We always work together, as the social partnership is an example of that.
Okay. Minister Straughn, what has government begun to think about in terms of how the administration can shield Barbadians from inevitable increase in prices that you yourself earlier this week in another forum mentioned is likely to happen?
Well, basically, the government has been monitoring since the pandemic not just the disruption in the supply chain, but we've been working with the private sector, specifically on being able to find alternatives with respect to sourcing their items. As a matter of fact, just about two weeks ago, we held another meeting specifically looking at how do we unlock northern Brazil in relation to some very specific items that will.
What kind of items?
Food items, so fruits, vegetables, meats, and the like, with respect to being able to ensure that we can mitigate the impact of these tariffs. Now, just I don't want Barbadians to appreciate that the United States is only one country in the world. Now, whilst a lot of what we consume may pass through the United States, we have been working with Guyana and Suriname, working on reducing the region's import bill by 25% by 2025. And that, in collaboration with what we want to open up with respect to Brazil, gives us the opportunity not just for the investment in the actual agricultural production, but the investment in the shipping that allows us to be able to bring items here without having to worry about tariffs. And I think that that's something that we, working with the private sector, will continue to push for, simply because we have to make sure that, at least when it comes to food security, that those issues, that we can satisfy that for Bajans, and I think to some extent in the region. And therefore, once we continue to be deliberate and decisive with respect to how we consume, I think there certainly will be opportunities to do other things. And I think what we have to also be mindful of is that whilst a lot of Barbadians rely on their relatives overseas, with respect to remittances and sending of barrels and that type of thing, overnight, all of the everything that, well, even though there's been some delay for 90 days on some countries, the reality is that inflation in the United States will start to rise. And therefore, it's going to cost more for your relatives living in the United States to send home those barrels. And therefore, to the extent that we in the region are now faced with a different reality, I think we now have to make sure that we can increase our production level within the region when it comes to food. Mark has spoken about the innovation that we are driving, and certainly at Newton, you're seeing some of that manifest itself. I think people are calling it the spaceship when you pass by the Henry Ford roundabout. These are the things that we are saying to Barbados that we need to invest in our future. We need to do that now. We need to work with our partners aggressively, like the African Exim Bank, to be able to open up opportunities such that we are shielded from whatever a single country may choose to do with respect to their trade policy.
We're taking a break and we're coming right back with more of the People's Business. Welcome back to the People's Business. Tonight we are discussing U.S. imposed tariffs and the shipping levies and how these are likely to impact Barbados. And we have Mr. Mark Hill, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Export Barbados. Mr. Lalu Vaswani, he is representing the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry as a past president, and Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Ryan Straughn. I'm going to start this segment with Mr. Mark Hill. What are Barbadian producers focusing on right now that can truly impact, add value to how Barbados can earn foreign exchange with products that they are exporting, especially in light of this trade war that's developing?
Yeah. So let me just put it in context. Now, Barbados imports about 800 million from the United States, but we send 40 million, right? So there's a big gap between how much we take versus how much we send.
Yes.
Of that 40 million, the bulk of it is food and beverages. So the reality is that a lot of our products and a lot of our value chains are food and beverage value chains going into the United States market, into the European market, but more so into CARICOM, because CARICOM is our biggest trade partner. Most of our 75% of our exports go into CARICOM. Now, as far as product is concerned, you know, the number one that comes to mind is rum, right? Which account for 50% of that 40 million that goes to the USA. Now, where we're focusing on innovating is in the life sciences. And in that life science space, we're looking at new levels of nutrition, because we believe that nutrition from both the blue economy and also new levels of nutrition around nutraceuticals is a massive growth area.
I would like you to expand on life sciences, but just before you do, there's a caller on the line, and I'd like to hear from that caller.
Okay.
Go ahead, caller. Good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome.
Good evening to the panel. I would like to put this question to either Minister Straughn or Mr. St. Hill.
Mark Hill. Mr. Hill.
I want to put a question to Minister Straughn or Mr. Hill, since they mentioned food as important. The question I would suppose is, when we were at war, we fed ourselves with big grain, rice, and other things. If this is a trade war and we are now at war, how are we proposing to use our agriculture sector to feed ourselves and reduce our imports?
So, caller, earlier I indicated that Barbados, along with Guyana and Suriname, all three countries are working specifically on reducing the food import bill for the region by 25%. And we've had three agricultural and investment conferences already across the region. And the ministries of agriculture in all three countries, as well as the customs authorities, are working to be able to increase production. And that is why I indicated earlier that the work that we're also going to be doing with northern Brazil with respect to other products to be able to assure our food security is a significant intervention that we had already started before these tariffs came into effect. And therefore, we will continue to push aggressively to bring that to reality, because we saw the experience during COVID with respect to our vulnerability as it relates to how countries treated to supplies, and therefore the region, CARICOM, determined that we were going to do this as a specific initiative. I should add that this effort is being supported by the African Exim Bank, because during COVID, all of the CARICOM benefited from participating in the African Medical Supplies Platform, which allowed all of us in the region to be able to access supplies when they were hard to come by. And therefore we felt it was important that as we are doing more trade, or the intention is to do more trade with Africa, that the intention now is to make sure not just that we deal with the food security element of the region, which means agriculture, but equally that we're able to export products, agricultural goods, processed items to Africa as part of how we diversify our economy and our methods of production in order to make sure then that the region is more sustained.
Thank you for that, Minister. Coming back to you, Mr. Hill, you were talking about adding value, focusing on value through our life sciences projects. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So life sciences create this opportunity for us to go up the value chain. So you're doing higher value inputs and higher value outputs as well. So it creates new entrepreneurial opportunities for small business persons.
Explain for our viewers what the life sciences entail. Yeah.
So the life sciences have to do with anything biological. So you can have from agricultural science, right through to pharmaceuticals, right through to medical technology. But it has to do with using biological resources to create value, right? So it's one of the fastest growing sectors on the planet today. And for Barbados in particular, that's where we've done a great deal of investment. The food center is part of our life science ecosystem. So in there, we're developing all types of formulas. We have about 50 entrepreneurs right now that are doing their products and production within that food science space. That means you're getting your HACCP certification, your global good manufacturing practices in place, but you're also working on your flavor profiles, your textures, and how you store. Because upstream, as the minister pointed out, 25% in agriculture, but that has to go somewhere. Because agriculture is a raw product. You have to figure out how you're going to convert it into either cereals, how you're going to convert it into products that last with long shelf life. So the midstream component is a very important component that the Caribbean has to invest in. Getting in the necessary equipment to convert it from just pumpkin to pumpkin flour, from pumpkin flour to chow mein, so that then it goes up the line like that. So that mainstream component is a massive opportunity. And if the minister was to convert the 25% opportunity, is on the low end, because it says we import about 80% CARICOM, 80% of our food is imported from outside. So 25% saving. You're talking about, on the low side, at least $1.5 billion in spend, and on the high side, about $3 billion in spend. So it's a massive entrepreneurial, business, commercial opportunity just around food and beverages alone. And so while the tariffs and that narrative, the Caribbean, the government has been doing the necessary things to create market, but it's now for the private sector people to step up and say, well, look, there is that 1.5 billion, there's that 3 billion. Let me put out some capital. Let me bring the cereal making machinery, because Barbadians like Fruit Loops and Kellogg's, as opposed to just trying to sell sweet potato as sweet potato. why can it not turn into a sweet potato biscuit? Why can it not turn into something that has shelf life, but nutritious at the same time, but has high value add to it as well? So that's where we're pushing our conversation within the life sciences. And lastly, we're looking at nutraceuticals like beetroots. Now, beetroot is extremely important for controlling high blood pressure, right? Now, beets may spoil very quickly as they come out the ground, but when you freeze dry them, you combine into powder, and you put them in these little gel pills. All of a sudden, a person is getting the benefits of that beetroot, but as a nutraceutical, that could go for ginger, that could go for turmeric. So the way how people are using nutrition going forward, there's a lot of innovation and there's a lot of market there in that particular space. Yeah.
We're taking a break now, and we're coming right back with more of the People's Business. Welcome back to the People's Business. I'm going to turn now again to Mr. Lalu Vaswani. You are representing the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry here, and feeding off of what Mr. Hill was talking about in terms of the investments that are needed to drive the value-added focus in Barbados. Would you say that the private sector has the appetite for making such investments in Barbados, given the current climate?
As a basic principle, private sector thrives on not just tactical opportunities, but strategic opportunities. And when we see what is before us, and we can see what is going to be with us for some time till it's fully resolved, it is important for the sustainability of businesses to diversify. And in this case, is the value chain, and we'll be very happy to work with the BIDC in those opportunities. So we certainly have the appetite. Many of our companies are already exporting to Latin America and other places already, non-traditional, not just EU, not just United States. So we already have that appetite, and it's an opportunity that helps us to use synergies to grow.
Okay, I have another question for you,
Sure.
but just before I ask it, I will take the question from the caller that's on the line. Go ahead. Good evening.
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
Welcome. Good evening.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, well, this question I just beg of comment. Because what we are faced with is this problem, and I hear Wagner with it. I think Vaswani hit the nail on the head. Something that we do right away. Efficiencies are poor. I find there's too much wasted time. People waste time to get the goods that here. Take for example, you mentioned that it could be a much 7 to 10 days before you can clear a country. Look, the largest port, cargo port in the world is in Shanghai. That can house like 25 million containers a year. And some of the world's largest cargo ships go in there. And in fact, one of the largest ones carries like 3,000 tenants, one. And this, around that ship, of course they have medical, we do, but this, around that, in 20 hours, not 21 or 2 hours, they have tight deadlines, they turn these around and get away there. Yeah. And I've had personal experience. Something comes in, and you get all types of excuses, all of delays. So I'm saying for a start, you can look at reducing these delays. Second thing, look at the trade routes. We look at fair bulk when you're taking from a large that have scholarship come to the Caribbean. And you look at all these, and if you really have to go there, who study all these factors and do things to reduce costs, whilst we're trying to improve our agriculture out here, then we can go a long way to solving this problem without just.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, caller. Mr. Vaswani, I'm coming back to you because you are the businessman in Bridgetown, and so you have a real pulse on how consumers are responding or how you're planning to ensure that consumers will continue to come into Swan Street. What source markets have you and others in the chamber beginning to look at in order to get goods at a cheaper price? How are you looking to diversify how you source goods?
Well, there are various ways. At an institutional level, we create trade shows or trade missions to different countries. We recently went to Panama. I think we're working on Mexico. We had one inbound trade mission from Jamaica. So it's a constant range of activities that we do. And the individual businesses also go to trade shows of different countries. There's one in China at this time of the year. There's some in Germany. And although it may be in a particular geographic location, it actually houses global suppliers at that location. So really and truly, when you go to these places, you're really going to the world to shop. And so that is what businesses do to get the latest knowledge of what is happening in the market, and also to be able to negotiate directly with source. And that is what large manufacturers do or large importers do, negotiate at source. Smaller companies may have to rely in buying secondary product, the same products from secondary sources, and there is a value in that as well too. But depending on the nature of your business, that's what you do.
Is it working, what you're doing in order to make prices cheaper for us?
It is working, but it's not without challenges. And that is why, for example, we have been working for the last 2 years. It may not be known publicly, but over 2 years we have been working through the chamber in conjunction with the Customs and Excise Department to lobby government on the changes we need to lower the cost of our importing. Those are costs that we can control. And the government readily sees the opportunity to work with us. And it's not like saying moving this glass from here to here. If you think of 360 degrees and so many different agencies working at so many different levels, and to integrate and harmonize those to make it more efficient, to become more current in terms of what they call risk management, where instead of having to examine 100%, they have their technical ways of determining what items to examine 100%, to get the safety for the country, but also to move the trade through at a lower cost.
I'm curious to know what you've been lobbying government for. What have you been asking for?
Whatever we ask for is for the benefit of Barbados, number one, as a principle.
The Minister of Finance is right here next to you.
And that is why I'm not afraid to say that. He can validate everything I've just said. No, seriously. The point is this, right? For example, I gave you the example of demurrage. Demurrage is it's like paying rent. If you're renting a house for something and you keep it longer, they may increase the rent because you went over. So they charge you a rent, it's called demurrage, on your containers that you use to transport your goods. But it's a very steep cost, and it's in US dollars that you have to pay. But sometimes you may want to clear the shipment, but there is some technical reason. First of all, it could be your own problem. If it is your documentation problem, then it's at you. But sometimes there may not be the necessary resources within the government department to respond to you in a timely manner, and therefore the costs accrue. So this is where the government says, okay, we see that we need to put in new technology, bring more training, bring more equipment so that our cruise ships, our activity is increasing, but then we also want to clear goods at the same time. So they're now examining, no secrets here, of going to even 24-hour, 3 shifts, examining the feasibility of that. And the point is, and they've said it clearly, listen, we are looking at it, but you, private sector, are you willing to invest what it takes to benefit from that? We are not going to spend the money and you don't use it.
Are you willing to give what the private sector is asking for? Are you saying to him, to the government, that the private sector is willing to invest?
It's not just invest in the terms of dollars, but it's invest in the resources needed. For example, you're accustomed to clearing your last shipment at 3:30 in the evening. If that goes to 11 p.m., they may be easier on the traffic side and so forth, but you need to have staff ready to receive it. Or when the shipping agents are working to clear a container, which happens throughout the night, 3 shifts, do you have somebody on site to make the necessary checks that have to be implemented to correct any errors that you identify? So at 7 a.m. when the company goes to clear the shipments are ready. Those are the type of investments we recognize and are willing to do and do so.
How is government willing to partner with the private sector to achieve these goals?
We have been monitoring this very, very, very carefully, because we have also noticed that, for example, containers will arrive. And actually, before I get to the containers, I believe in the front page of today's paper, Sunday Sun, the CEO of the port would have said all the carriers have been cleared in relation to the auction. Now, those carriers, 400 and something odd, were taking up physical space in the port itself. And therefore, as we looked at the data to see, well, okay, why are these carriers here? Why are these containers still in the port? A number of people, in part, were using effectively the port as a storage facility. And it really doesn't make sense, because, as Lalu indicated, the longer you keep stuff in the port, the more expensive it becomes. And therefore, we have been looking at ways to be able to drive down the storage time in the port. We've been working with the chamber with respect to elements of pre-clearance, such that even before the vessel arrives, that is the opportunity to pre-clear items, so that, as we just saw with the electric buses, they landed and they were straight out of the port. Now, to Lalu's point, it requires not everybody to understand the shift in work time to be able to make this happen. And the government is with respect to the port works 24 hours, and therefore we are working with all the other agencies to make sure that that is possible. Now, the port has a physical constraint at the moment, and therefore we've been building berth 6 to increase the capacity. Barbadians, if they drive down the mighty Grinder Highway, they will see these 2 new cranes that have just arrived a few weeks ago, which is intended to be able to make sure we can offload ships faster with more capacity, whilst we build out the additional space, because as we get more cruise ships, which are welcome, the reality is that once we have 3, 4, 5 cruise ships in, it means that cargo is slowed down with respect to unloading. So there's a genuine logistical and spatial issue that we are resolving. It's taken some investment, it takes time, and as we are putting in the interventions with respect to the tech side, which is why we're upgrading to Asikuta 5. We're working with the private sector to do more technology. We are pushing the government departments to do more risk management with respect to the areas that Lalu have indicated. But it also means that private sector, if we want to be able to lower costs on going forward will also have to change on their side in relation to being able to get this done. But it's an ongoing concern of ours because we see the foreign exchange going out, we see the costs associated with to Barbadians going up in areas that we really don't need to have those costs go up. So we're working on it, and we are pushing to make sure that it happens without us having to impose penalties to make it happen. And therefore, that's why we're working collaboratively with the private sector to be able to achieve that.
Okay, we have a caller on the line. Caller, go ahead. Welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening to you and your guests, to our viewers and our listeners. Just two brief questions. One to the minister. You're going to do trade with Africa. I perceive that this trade will be a United Caribbean trade. How would I like to know how we would get that work out with different currencies in the Caribbean and different cost of living in the Caribbean? That is the first question. And the second one is, can the ships that want to go to the United States, can they either come direct to the Caribbean or drop off the cargo at Southern Africa and then try and ship it to the Caribbean? Those are two questions. Thank you.
Okay, sir. So the issue of the different currencies, there was a time ago, probably about 30, could be 40 years ago now, where we had the Caribbean Multilateral Clearance Facility, which was intended to clear and pay for goods that were traded within the region without having to use US dollars. It didn't work at the time simply because we didn't have the volume of trade taking place. Things have changed significantly today. Increasing trade with Africa will allow for that also to take place. And I want to reiterate, especially given that we are having this conversation in the context of a global trade war, well, launched by the United States. The reality is that whilst the dollar has been the reserve currency for a long time, you are seeing the emergence of the BRICS countries as alternative with respect to how trade is done. And the launch of the digital renminbi, which is the Chinese currency, is something that is on the horizon with respect to being able to have an alternative. Now, I raise this in response to the caller simply because as you do trade with other parts of the world, so for example, if you are wanting to do trade with Europe, the Europeans are interested in euros, they're not really interested in dollars, they're not interested in anything else. And therefore, we earn foreign exchange from Europe when tourists come, and therefore if you want to buy a BMW or Mercedes or anything, or Caterpillar or anything from Germany, obviously they want euros in exchange for that. And therefore, the reason that we have trade, meaning people coming, which allows us to earn euros, such that if we want to import some capital equipment from Germany, that we actually have euros to pay the Germans. And therefore, to the extent that as we diversify our trade and the economy, it means that we're going to have to earn in the currency, if you like, meaning there's genuine trade happening between countries that allows that, for that to happen. Now, with respect to the logistics, as first and foremost, we're working on the air routes in addition to the actual shipping lines. And I think what the world has witnessed in relation to certainly the last 100 years is that we've built the trade routes with respect to the demand, given that the United States at one point used to have a significant amount of manufacturing, and therefore the routes traditionally were driven by that. As you've seen the decline in manufacturing from the United States to the degree that it has, the shipping lines have not adjusted sufficiently. Now, what you will inevitably see out of this, and especially with the imposition of the tariffs on Chinese-made ships, is that people will then start to choose differently where the ships will go. And therefore, we believe that the work that we have already started, Barbados was already a transshipment hub for the wrong reason 400 years ago. And therefore, we believe that we can be deliberate with respect to how we can be a global hub once again. But I think it is work in progress, and therefore we believe that the region, and of which Barbados is clearly a part, that we can do legitimate trade with Africa, not just in goods, but certainly in exporting capital as well. We have a relatively high savings ratio in the region, and therefore we need to deploy that capital such that all of our citizens in the region can earn a decent rate of return, but it is done so out of genuine trade.
We're taking a break and coming straight back with more of The People's Business. Welcome back to The People's Business. Tonight we are discussing how U.S. imposed tariffs and shipping levies are likely to affect us in Barbados. But we're very much focusing on solutions. And I'm going to start this segment with Mr. Mark Hill. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Export Barbados. Many of you will know it as BIDC. Now, we're preparing people to export. You have talked about value chains and focusing on the life sciences. What markets are you now looking to push our exports to that would redound to the best benefit for Barbados?
Yeah. So one of the key areas that we're focusing on is Canada, the Canadian market. So right now we actually have in that market a trade officer promoting all that we're manufacturing, plus the stuff that we're innovating in the pipeline. And we're getting tremendous interest from that market, particularly some of the stuff coming out of the food science center. So we have like 50 persons, as I said earlier, and they have been getting better offtake in that market. But our focus is on trying to grow to $1 billion in exports. And to do that, what we're looking at is expanding what we're doing in CARICOM in a significant way. So moving what we're currently doing to at least double that in the short term. We've shipped stuff off to Africa. So in Ghana, we've been seeing tremendous interest in our Rubisco. We've shipped their biscuits there. We've also shipped some of our rums, even the Morbies as well. We shipped to Africa. So we're seeing tremendous interest there. But now we're looking to move not just in Ghana, but in Kenya as well. We have embassy there that is very aggressive in marketing, and also into the UK as well. We're pushing hard. So we're not saying this market versus that. We're pushing where we can find as much demand as possible. And what we're seeing is that there's such a high level of interest in Barbadian products, but the supply issue is that we cannot stock out, if you understand what I mean by stocking out. So for example, there's one store in Canada that you can't miss a beat, if you understand where I'm coming from. Yes, whereby you ship them a 40-foot container this month, and they want the same exact shipment next month. You can't tell them that you don't have it. So what we're doing in the value chain on the midstream side is making sure that we have enough bandwidth, that we have enough stock in place that covers us at least for 6 or 7 months, that as we start to meet these big orders coming from these places, because these stores don't order a bucket. It's 40-foot container and they want one every week. You know, so the farmers and stuff like that are supplying us have to ensure that they can give us 40-foot container of inputs every week to value add and ship out. But we're taking on the challenge. We're prepping ourselves. So investments like the Food Science Center, we're about to expand it for cold chain so that we can blast freeze again a lot of our value, because we're not focusing on just the local market. Ultimately, it's about making and earning as much foreign exchange as possible. So therefore, we're aggressively going after those big markets, but we got to build the value chains to make sure that as the world say, well, we're taking on as much product from Barbados as possible, that we don't disappoint them. That 1 week is on the shelf and the next week is not on the shelf. And so there's that consistency that we got to build. So we're rebuilding and we're strengthening so that we can be consistent and sustainable going forward. Yeah.
We have a caller on the line. Caller, go ahead. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes. Two requests. One to the gentleman from the BIDC, and the other one, Mr. Hill, and the minister. I'm sorry, Mr. Private Sector guy, but I really don't have anything for you
Mr.
tonight.
Vaswani.
Yeah. To Mr. Hill, you're stuck with the food and the life sciences, but the cultural industries are also a very saleable product. And that is one industry that relies heavily on design. And when you rely on design, price is not an issue. So perhaps you can change your mindset before you leave office to focus a bit more on the cultural industries and what they can offer the rest of the world, including Africa. Suggestion. To Mr. Straughn, Minister Straughn, government since ONRSA have always been involved with raising revenue for the government, as if that is a good thing. We've been able to raise revenue here, raise revenue there, but at the same time, when you raise revenue, you make our lives more difficult because we pay taxes. You will be raising more revenue because of the tariffs that will be because of the increased costs at the port and the price to the consumers at the end. The VAT, therefore, will be increased. So the revenue to the government will increase as a result of the increased prices. So may I request respectfully that you decide at some point to lower the VAT from 17.5% down to maybe 12 or 13% to offset some of the increased misery that will be imposed on us as consumers going forward. Will this be part of a consideration that you are prepared to take up? Sir.
So, sir, I just wanted to appreciate that we don't do tax policy in public in that way. But let me indicate to you that from the perspective of where we see the concern here, I think as Lalu has indicated, demand is going to be impacted by these prices. And therefore, it is not a straight one-to-one assumption that because the price goes up, that suddenly the VAT is going to go up automatically, because at the end of the day, consumers will make their choices. As I indicated earlier, we will be aggressively with Guyana and Suriname focusing on the reduction in the food import bill, and therefore there are a combination of factors there that don't necessarily lead to the conclusion that the caller has suggested. Let me say though, on design specifically, yes, we have been through Export Barbados, been focusing precisely on that particular matter, where we have been supporting designers in order to be able to get their samples, go and find the associated manufacturers to get the samples done, such that they can get their products produced at a more cost-effective manner and get the products to market. The reality is that if you have to get any inputs from the United States, then it would mean that those inputs will cost more. Hence the reason that we've said to persons that we have to utilize the full global supply chain as far as possible, because the rest of the world is not imposing tariffs on us. And therefore, we do believe that a lot of our designers and artists and the like, in the earning of foreign exchange, will benefit from utilizing that global supply chain. We've been putting the systems in place to make sure that the financing and everything is unlocked to support that. And therefore, if there are any designers out there listening to this program, notwithstanding the fact that there may be a tariff of 10% on any item that you may send into the United States, the value of that, if you're really at the top end of the market, then we are confident that those brands, that premium value that's there, is sustainable, and therefore we encourage you to be able to make sure then that you continue to utilize the full global supply chain to lower the costs of production as far as possible, but do not yield on the value and the premium nature of the work that you're doing. And therefore, we with respect to trademark protections and these types of issues, the government stands ready to support such practitioners.
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Vaswani.
Something that sometimes members in the public may not appreciate. When we had COVID, there was a total disruption of the supply chain, as we are all aware. And where traditionally a shipment, the freight cost was $4,000 or $5,000 from the Far East to Barbados, it went up to as high as $20,000. And that if you are begging to get your goods accepted. When we went to the government and pointed this out, they did an analysis, and immediately they came with a system of capping the freight to what it was the year before that new impediment came in, so that the duty is computed not only on the value of the goods, but also on the freight cost, so that they were able to mitigate the costs being passed to us, the importer, and then to the consumer. The consumer may not realize this, but the government does do things like that. There is one other element, if things get realistically worse, that they could look at, and I'm sure they would, is there comes a point in time there you can exclude freight from the computation of which duty is charged, because that's an input cost which gets increased as you go to the thing. So, but when the time comes, we know that the government is always open but objective to do what is best for Barbados. That has been our experience.
Well, we're going to do a quick wrap-up. You're going to get your turn to say what you would like to say, Mr. Hill, in your wrap-up. We're wrapping up now tonight. We've been discussing U.S. imposed tariffs and the shipping levies and, you know, what President Donald Trump has been proposing and how they are likely to impact Barbados. And tonight in studio, we've had Mr. Mark Hill. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Export Barbados, representative of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Lalu Vaswani, and he is a Bridgetown businessman, and of course, Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Ryan Straughn. 30 seconds each before we go. What would you like to say, each of you? I'm going to begin with Mr. Hill.
Yeah, coming back to the caller's point, design is critical, right? And it's critical across the board, because every single thing that we do ties right back to design. But one of the things I want to point out about design is that Barbados is known for luxury, right? The jurisdiction is viewed as one of these exotic spaces. So not all design is equal. But the key point is that we ultimately export brands, right? So where the product is made and how much it costs doesn't matter. It is what is the value of the brands that we're building in Barbados. Because if we, say for example, we design a shoe, we send the AutoCAD drawings over to Vietnam, they produce the shoe for $5, send back to Barbados, but Barbados can then sell that shoe that was designed in Barbados for $300. So the reality is that we got to focus on, yes, design, but really about building brands that people love across the globe.
Mr. Vaswani?
I'd say two things. One is that I feel that I'd like to throw a challenge to Minister Straughn and the government that we need to work on stimulating further economic activity in economic centers, and starting with Bridgetown and then other Oystons and St. Peter and so forth. So we'd like to throw that challenge to partner with the Chamber of Commerce to grow the economic activity in these areas, to invest jointly with us so we can do it. And number two, manufacturing and exports are usually free of duties on inputs. And I'd like them to give consideration to perhaps persons who are driving rental cars to lower their costs because our hospitality sector is going to grow. That may be an area, if they had lower costs, they could invest in more new cars to supply the demand that is coming through.
Minister Straughn, you've been challenged here tonight. You've been lobbied here tonight as well. What are your final words?
Well, my final words are that to Barbadians is this. The government has already started some significant investments in these areas precisely to be able to diversify the economy. The time is now to bring those investments to fruition. We need to partner strategically, as Mark has indicated, around the world to be able to get our products to the market, but in the market in a reliable fashion. And I think that if we understand the importance of logistics, Lalu had raised it earlier in relation to the clearance of goods, logistics is going to be the future of Barbados. And our ability to move goods, whether in Barbados, outside of Barbados, get into the markets, it will depend on how we are prepared to invest our monies in productive enterprise, whether that's in agriculture, whether it's in agro-processing, whether it's in manufacturing, or any of the other areas that highlighted here, such that as people visit Barbados, they can consume those goods and services, but equally that we're able to get our goods into the high traffic areas across the world in the same way that other entities are doing so. And I think the point about design, it cannot be understated. We have to make sure that we're never going to create low volume, high volume manufacturing goods. And therefore we must focus on the areas that brings greater value, and that is the path that the government has set the country on.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. And on behalf of the head of our News and Current Affairs Department, Mr. Kent Jerson, and the crew, thank you, viewers, for watching. I'm Stacey Russell, looking forward to seeing you very soon for the next People's Business. Good night.